Hello, class. The focus this week is on the design and development of adult learning curriculum. We spent the first week looking at the history and examining different theories. Week 2, we looked at the different characteristics of adult learners, and all those are important factors to consider as we begin to design and develop curriculum. If we don't understand those and understand who our learners are, we're going to struggle with designing curriculum that is beneficial for them. So this week we are going to look at the outer two rings of the andragogy and practice model, looking at the growth and purposes for learning and the individual and situational differences, because we need to have a good understanding of these in order to effectively design the curriculum. So looking up here, when we think about that goals and purposes for learning, we look at what is the purpose, what is the design of the learning experience. Is it for institutional growth, for the better of the organization? That's where you think of training and development, the idea that learning is usually put on by the organization, and it is for, yes, the betterment of employees, but also for the betterment of the organization. You have societal growth for the betterment of society, driven by society, and then the idea here is that this learning is going to be put into action to help society. And then you have individual growth, which is driven by the individual, more the traditional view, and adult learning is usually designed exclusively for individual growth. So think even for you all in this course, you are in here for individual growth. Now you may be getting reimbursed by your institution, so it could cross those two lines, but this is for your growth. So moving on down to the second ring, and we're looking at individual and situational differences. And these are the variables. These are the variables that each individual brings in and influences how we go about learning. And as you will see going forward, that's why it is so important to understand our learners and what they bring. So you have your situational differences, and we'll spend more time next week looking at that, looking at the environment and the format influences how learners occur. Here, perfect example is online learning. For some individuals, this is the best way in the world to learn. For others, it's a horrible way to learn, and it influences how the actual learning occurs. And or even, if this class was a face-to-face class, I would not teach it in the same manner that I do in an online course. So there's a different approach to it. There are individual learning differences, and we looked at that with the different theories and the idea that each adult learner is unique, just like as each individual is. And ideally, we understand these differences and tailor the program towards that. And in doing so, we can develop different approaches, strategies, preferences, and that's why, and as the example I give, we would not teach welding the same way we would teach history. So those are things we need to consider. Next, we need to look at the adult learner needs, and I've included some information on that. The idea that there are certain characteristics of adult learners, as we found out, and there are certain needs and motivations that they have. And so here's an article I found that talks about 10 really interesting adult needs. And again, I don't agree with all of them, but I definitely agree that there's something that we need to consider. And a lot of these, as you read through them, you'll realize they tie back into a lot of those 6 principles of andragogy. Next, we have some tips and techniques. I came across this article and I thought it was very informative, and again, a good list of ideas to consider when developing your curriculum. It talks about some different points, clear goals, content, appropriate delivery, assessment, remediation, those type of things when we are developing our curriculum. Here's some more very interesting information I've come across. And as you'll see here, the first principle is the needs assessment, something that we addressed earlier in this lecture, and as you see in the soft chalk lesson as well. And understanding what is the needs. In training and development, you would look at this and say, do we even need the training and development? Is it going to solve the problem? And the same approach should be taking in education as far as developing a course. For example, this course, what is the needs of the students, and is there even a need for this course, and if so, then how can we make sure that we are meeting those objectives? It also goes into some other factors to consider, such as the safety of the learning environment. Again, we'll touch on that more next week, talking about the relationships and how the relationships are unique with adult learners, because you are equals, unlike in high school or middle school. Sequence reinforcement, how you go about designing it, where you know to begin. One of the articles I've included today touches on that and a great deal more. Reflection, understanding your own learning, learning with ideas, feelings, and actions, using emotions that can be important to do. And then teamwork is, again, something that we'll touch on in another article, but the idea that adult learners like to learn from each other, like to be able to talk about issues and discuss issues. I always was told after I got my undergraduate degree, if you go to get a master's degree, it's less in-class reading and those type of activities, and it's more you do the reading outside, you come into class, you discuss and talk about the different issues. And with adult learners, they're going to have that experience, they're going to have that knowledge, and that should be utilized when developing curriculum. Next, we have the delivery, and again, this will get touched on in future models, but there are certainly some considerations. When we talked about learning environments a little bit earlier, but we need to think about how it's different for a face-to-face and online or a blended course, and how we can design curriculum to fit into each of those spaces. Even teaching methods. I use a couple examples here of lecture discussion. Obviously, there are numerous videos, readings, all different type of teaching methods, and determining what is best for our learners, which again goes back to having to have a strong understanding of who our learners are and what they bring to the table. Then you get into technologies, technology requirements, technology skill level, support systems, and making sure that everybody understands and has access to that information. And then also some components that we need to consider, just as if for those of you in education know, you have your learning objectives, your assessments, your exercises, content, lesson planning, all those things need to be considered. I was talking to my brother last night, and he does a lot of online training, and his boss came up to him, and he had a 5-hour training session where people would come from across the country and listen to this training. And the guy asked him where his script was. Well, he didn't have a script because he didn't use a script. But something like that, having a script, having the content laid out, having a set path is important when developing your curriculum. The last thing that I want to go over in this lecture are the 3 articles I've included. The first one is on engaging adult learners, and it provides some different characteristics that teachers should consider, some strategies. And I think there's definitely some good material in here, so read through this. It talks about different teaching methods, and it gives some good examples. Again, as you will see as you read through all this material, it all goes back to those 6 principles. It gets into self-directed learning, active learning, gets into collaborative learning, and this will tie into our discussion question, where we look at collaborative learning and the use of discussion as a way to create that collaboration. Our second article looks at motivation, how that influences adult learning, and how we can use that to develop curriculum. Again, it goes into a little bit of depth of the adult learner, some questions about what they're doing and what they consider, what motivates adult learners. And again, as we look back to those principles, adult learners are motivated to learn if there is something there to better themselves, and if there's a benefit in a course. I'm sure you all have been in courses in the past where you just felt like you were getting nothing out of the course, and there's really no reason to be in the course. And that can make it very challenging, and you don't necessarily see the benefit in it, and so you're maybe not as motivated. So there are definitely some good ideas in here, different things you can do, which is really nice to provide more ideas for you as we go about developing some curriculum. And the final article I have is about curriculum design for adults, where to start. And as you will see it, when I posted that article, I included that course or the quote about what am I preparing learners to do. And it's a great starting point when designing curriculum to think about the end in mind. What are you trying to get out of this class, out of this training program? For me, with this course, the idea is at the end of this that you'll have developed some skills in order so that you can be more effective teaching your adult learners. That is the end game, and we are going to develop ourselves to get to that point, so that way you leave this course, you can say, okay, I'm teaching a class on welding and I have 12 students who are adult learners. Here are some strategies that I can use to be effective. But this is a really good post as well. It talks about different considerations that we should take into account. As I said, it's a good resource as well. So you have 3 really good articles this week that adds to the content. If you guys have any questions about the content, please let me know.